Bah, bah, bah. All right, greetings from the Survival Pod. This is Freedom Film. What's the topic? I think we're gonna look back at some of the transgender surgeries that they did on kids, like we look back on doing lobotomies or phrenology. I'm gonna point something out. I think a lot of people term trust the science. If we're being honest about it, we've replaced God with something of our own making, thinking it would be more pure than the corruption we saw with the religions. But it turns out, much like with religion, we corrupt things. For all the good we can do, we can also do so much evil. Where am I going with this? Freedom Phil, like, subscribe, let's get into it, and always turn up the video speed. And why do I say that? Because you're watching my videos at regular speed, you're watching my videos at least 1.75 when I upload it. I mean, hell, the name of the channel is what to do in life. Turn up the video speed. You want to enjoy things more? Fucking turn up the speed. Let's get into it. Freedom Phil, like, subscribe. I was sitting there watching people have this conversation, debate about a particular transgender issue. And I'm just kind of reminded of the idea that humans are generally an irrational species. We can be quite logical at times. We can do incredible things. And honestly, I wonder how much IQ, like the further down the IQ goes, the more mystical woo-woo crap people believe in. I wonder how much of it's impulse control as well. That's a whole separate conversation. But I don't know, man. I've said for years, without a God, they shall build a God, because all they know how to do is worship. And you could see back during COVID, that a clear example of what I just said. They built a God out of science, and they were building that God for a long time. I understand why a lot of people had a problem with the religious right. I really do. It was ridiculous. But if I had to choose between the sane world of the 80s and the 90s, you know, despite, you know, some of the manufactured craziness, like you go back to the 60s and 70s and the fake faux craziness of some of the hippies, and then, you know, the drug-addled disco and rockers and stuff followed up by hair metal, manufactured insanity. But for the most part, if you went across America, the world was normal. I remember as a little kid living in a tiny little logging town. I lived in Forks. And it was a very, very normal place. Rained a lot, I can say that for sure. But it was a normal time in America. Now, you had a lot of religious fervor back then. But you could ignore that. You could basically, if you were religious, you were religious. And if you weren't, you weren't. It wasn't like you go so many decades previous, if you weren't religious, people were really up your ass about it. And I'd argue we have went that way. And luckily, it looks like the tide's kind of receding. One might argue the insanity of collective thinking. It's kind of like the whole concept of, you know, global sea rising and, you know, ice melt. That, you know, we're just gaining water at this point. You know, incrementally, the tide is raising a little here and there over the course of, you know, decades, centuries. And I think the insanity that we've seen with the trans issue, the COVID issue, yeah, because, yeah, a lot of people were sick and tired of the religious right, you know, like, blah, 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 what, finger wagging, this isn't moral, you shouldn't be able to do this, you know. And, you know, the battles back then, this is just my opinion, about I shouldn't have to say pledge the allegiance in God we trust or any of that shit. That's right, you shouldn't have to. But did we not go the complete opposite direction when it came to the woke nonsense? Since I'd say somewhere in the mid to late, let's say late 2000s, the world started going more and more crazy. And by 2015, it was pretty 13 or 15, it was pretty fucking evident that the world had gone completely nuts. But we were all on this roller coaster, and much like the, insane fervor, you see where mobs of people in history, oh, they're the devil and they're burning a witch. Well, honestly, if you've seen some of these crazy Karens out there screaming like harpies, I would think that woman was fucking possessed. I mean, just to be real about it, I would assume you're possessed if you're screaming that way. And I've seen these videos of women doing that crap. We have got to a point where the mental instability, the insanity, is now normal. Like and one person pointed this out, and I think really that it was a very valid point. In the past, your parents would have given you a slap upside the back of the head, like, what are you doing? Get it right. Maybe an ass whooping, maybe, you get your backside spanked. We took all that away. So all the reasonable barricades in society that kept people from being completely out of their fucking minds that we had, say, in the late 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, like we worked our way. And by the way, previous decades too, like, honestly, I'd say it was somewhere in God started falling off in the 60s. Let's just be real about it. It was still there, but it was falling off. More people were just kind of doing what they wanted to do based on their choices. Even though there was a lot of lip service from politicians. But now, just like I said at the very beginning, we're going to look back at the transing of children. Hell, the way we gave children like psychoactive drugs, not just like when it comes to the trans thing, castration pills. Puberty blockers were castration pills. And they tested this back in the late 80s, 90s, and the 2000s of Ritalin and Adderall and whatever else. They did this. They did this to your kids. So it's not a surprise that they would go the step further. It's not. But then, like, when you start talking about people transing the kids, and it became a social contagion. I watched regular, normal people I know, saying, well, maybe my son's gay, or maybe my son's this. I didn't see any of this shit with your daughters, by the way. I didn't see that. Isn't that kind of weird? Like they were trying to gay your sons. Look, and I don't have a problem with the LGBT, but I think it's kind of like nature should kind of bloom on its own. It should do what it does on its fucking own. And this idea that you were giving kids effectively castration pills, just a decade or two ago, people would be fucking horrified at what you were doing to these children. We would look at it as some sort of barbarism. We look at it like, my God, like some mad scientist type of shit. And now that the tide's kind of receding a bit, the great high tide of wokeness, COVID was like this. COVID was a testing ground to see how much shit people were willing to put up with. And you proved it doesn't matter. Like mask between bites. That reminds me of some of the shit they talked about the Nazis doing. And the Soviets, but particularly the Nazis. Because the Soviets would say, we don't care so much what they think, just as long as they do what they're told. But the Nazis, they wanted to change your fucking mind. They wanted to convince you. They wanted to have you so psyoped that you were a true believer. And I look back at COVID and I'm like, yeah, mask between bites, 6 feet. And people say, they proved that a lot of these masks that you were wearing didn't do a fucking thing. Now, admittedly, like when you have a surgeon wearing a cloth mask or something like that, that's to keep like spit and foreign, mouth particles from getting into the surgery. So, I mean, there are times, but this whole dog and pony show that we were all forced to live under then gets outperformed by the next level of insanity. And you know, Rush Limbaugh pointed this out years ago when that San Franciscan gay choir and says, "And we're coming after your kids." They literally told you what they were doing. And I wonder how many of those gay choir members ended up having, you know, sex assault charges on them. Like, how many of them actually were kid diddlers? Just like the Drag Time Story Hour. Look, if you want to be a drag queen, fine. But the first people that should be policing your community is you. Because you know what? When you get the bad actors that go out there and do the crazy shit, just like with the Christians or the Muslims, when you got the bad actors that go out and do shit, it doesn't matter how good of a representation you are. If you let the bad people slip through, people are going to just remember the bad people. You get somebody who's a crazy, you know, Christian, you know, they're willing to bomb an abortion clinic. That's what people are going to think about for regular Christians for a while, until that fades from the memory. The same thing goes for a lot of this craziness with the trans stuff. I'm going to say that the trans community has probably done more damage to the LGBT community. The new trans, not the old trans. The new trans, the woke trans, has done more fucking damage to the LGBT community than any of the annoyances that happened in the previous decades. Because now people look at it and they think you're just like, let's say you're a regular person, gay, straight, whatever. Now they're going to look suspiciously at you. They're going to sit there and be like, you know, I don't know about these people. They were trying to fucking do surgeries and give fucking castration drugs to children. And I think in due time, as the wave kind of recedes temporarily, it goes both ways. This teeter-totter of shit goes up and down. It goes from one direction to another. And either way, you're strapped to the middle in the fucking bucket of sewage douche shit on one way or the other. That's society. This situation, I think people are going to look back at this era for how barbaric it really was. And you're going to have people that come out and say, well, oh my God, I can't believe they weren't transing people. And it's like, that's going to be a fringe minority of people. I remember when I was trucking, I met this guy. He was a gay dude, like flaming gay. He was good conversation, by the way. We were talking, and he's like, I want to live away from all the crazies. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, he wanted to live in San Francisco. I'm like, man, that's going to be expensive, dude. And he's like, yeah, but I want to live around my people. I mean, I understand that's his people because he grew up in the South. But you got to understand, when you concentrate yourself with a bunch of people who all agree with the same opinions, you can get some horrific shit coming out of that. No different than what you saw with the religious people. That if you get enough people with that same cohesive idea, then when bad shit comes along, let's say you got a charismatic leader. That charismatic leader can convince a lot of you to do horrific things. And if you don't believe me, look at the past history of wars. Look how many people died under the Soviets, Pol Pot, Mao. Look how many people died in religious wars. World War II, the Nazis. Look at the genocides, like all over the world, the Armenian genocide. Look at shit still going on in Africa to this very day. Christians being slaughtered Muslims. By the way, Pope, whatever your name is it about time you order a crusade? You know, maybe put people back in their place so you can be peace again? You know, sometimes I feel like I'm a rational person from another time period, like a normal person, I should say, a rational, normal person from another time. And somehow, some way, I've been transported to this era of like excess luxury and insanity. Like, I think it's really something kind of twisted. Like, for instance, you see cases where people will spend an ungodly amount of money on status, luxury, oversized houses, everything to build a temple unto themselves, build gods of themselves effectively. And their neighbors are doing it. They're all doing it. And then when the social contagion says, your kid might be trans, maybe they are. But maybe they're just going through a phase, like weird clothing. You guys remember some of the stupid shit in the late 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s that people were wearing? The fashion trends? Those fashion trends were dumb, but they weren't life-altering. Well, that is, unless you were in the hood. People getting shot over their fucking Nikes and shit. That's crazy. I'm just going to say it. It's a pair of shoes. But you start to think about it. How much of this whole transing thing, just like burning witches back in the day, how much of it really was a social contagion that most people went along with, just like COVID? Exactly like COVID. And then we're all just supposed to be like, well, that's the way it is. Well, that was the fashion of the time. You know, that thing from The Simpsons, Grandpa Simpsons. And I tied an onion to my belt because that was the fashion of the time. And you think about it from a rational perspective, and you're like, wow, why would you do that? Now, I think we're going to look back at someday we'll look back at the self-made gods we've made of ourselves. And we're going to look back at some of the fashion trends, some of the popular movements. And I think it's going to occur to us, just like when you look back at some of the excesses in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, of how fucking nuts things really were. The things were normal, but there were cases and places that things were just absolutely out of your mind. I think at some point, we'll quietly, rationally admit that what we were doing at the time, just like with World War II, was fucking insanity. And how many people got duped into it. Without a God, they shall build a God. Because all they need to do is worship. Freedom Phil, like, subscribe. Take it easy.